about to go to the next part of our program. And this is a different format than most of the presentations by senior HR executives. And mostly they discuss programmatic successes and challenges and things like that. Now, some of you who were here last year may remember I did the on-stage interview with John McMahon from Cumberland Gulf. We're going to do something similar. Again, we're going to focus on both the person and their story and the program that's still in progress, this mammoth workforce integration at what is now the world's largest airline, the New American. It's not completed. We're going to explore her considerable experience. Cindy Fiedelman, if you'd come to the stage, please. Please help me welcome Cindy Fiedelman from American Airlines.
Thank you.
All right, let's sit down. So, she's responsible for much of the HR operation and the workforce integration as part of this merger. It's an enormous effort when they're done. And it will be one of the world's largest employers in just about every country in the world. I mean, it's just mammoth and geographically dispersed. We're going to cover how different professional experiences in her life prepared her for the job she does. And this is kind of an inside the actor studio format, all right? We're going to be allowing some questions from the audience, though I reserve the right to either take questions or not, depending on where we are in the session. So, Cindy, let's talk a little bit about your bio. Let me tell everyone a little bit about you. First of all, Cindy went to school here in Philadelphia at the University of Pennsylvania, though she is a native of Dallas, where she has returned. She was appointed Vice President of People and Diversity at American Airlines in March of 2013. So she volunteered for this, okay? In the role she is right now, she's responsible for talent management, talent acquisition, you don't have comp, right?
Right.
Right, no, she doesn't have comp. They took that away since we wrote the script. No, it was a typo here. Diversity and engagement initiatives and working to further Americans' culture and people development. She has a history of building teams, focusing on attracting top talent. Prior to American, she served as Vice President of Human Resources and Talent Acquisition at Avaya, where she led the global HR business partner and recruiting team. In addition to responsibility for executive staffing and professional and university recruiting, she worked with the business to drive a number of initiatives around talent management and career development. She was also a key player. This is not your first rodeo, is it? And that's just because you're from Texas, I make that joke.
Of course.
No, really, it was just because you're from Texas. And she played a leading role in Avaya's acquisition and integration of Nortel. Prior to that, she was involved in yet another merger. She served as Director of Global Talent Acquisition for Sun Microsystems. She had responsibility throughout the Americas, EMEA, and APAC, and created a centralized executive recruiting organization. Now, she came to Sun Microsystems through the merger of Storage Tech and stayed on with with Sun after Storage Tech was acquired. And then one of her more notable accomplishments at Storage Tech was calling me when I was at Conexa in the middle of the night, practically, and saying, hey, I got your number, and I was wondering if you guys are interested in talking to us about RPO. So that's why I know her so well. Cindy is a former client of mine from back in the day. So she was part of that whole $4.1 billion acquisition of Storage Tech by Sun. Prior to that, she worked at Heidrick & Struggle as an executive search consultant, and also had worked for Comcast, corporate recruiting, and Boston Market and Einstein Bagels. So she's had a number of different phases in her career, which is amazing because you're so youthful. So there you go.
A lot of stuff.
Yeah. First of all, Cindy, I want to congratulate you for bravely and foolishly agreeing to manage this scale of merger. Okay. How did you progress? Let's take this for a moment. In your career to this job. I mean, we talked about some of the experiences you've had, but you started off as a liberal arts degree. I think you have a degree in art history, if memory serves me. And how did you move into HR? And then what are the experiences that really specifically are helping you in what you're trying to do today?
Well, let's see. In all honesty, when I graduated from Penn, I had no idea what I wanted to do. And in every attempt to avoid getting a real job, I moved to Colorado and lived in the mountains as a ski bum, if you will, for about 5 years. So that was really trying to figure out how I wanted to get started. But I will say I ended up working in a hotel, and in a resort hotel, when you're working on the, on the front line, I think that was, as crazy as it sounds, that was one of the things early on that really helped me figure out how to work with people in a customer service environment where, generally when people are coming in for their Christmas vacation, and if you overbook the hotel, you're getting yelled and screamed at the front desk. And to be able to manage yourself out of a paper bag in that situation, I had the ability to do that somehow. And I think that, that started that customer service piece for me back at that time. But really, after I got out of there, I realized I needed to get a real job and got into, a friend of mine had been running a recruiting firm, the management MRI, I can't remember what it stands for, but it was one of those big recruiting firms. And he said, you should really get into executive search. So I ended up moving to Denver I was living up in Aspen, and I lucked out and I worked for one of the only retained executive search firms that was based in Denver. And I would say that early on, I learned how to, those were in the days before computers, almost before answering machines, if I remember correctly, and doing search work through using, for those of you guys who are familiar with it, with the big green books where you had to look up names of people and make cold calls.
Register.
Yeah, exactly.
Commerce register. Yes.
So I cut my teeth on just being able to pick up the phone and call anybody. I also worked for a lady who was probably one of the toughest people I ever worked for. I'll reserve my sidebar comments on what she was like, but she taught me some really good lessons about really knowing being smart, knowing as much as you can about your who you're talking to and about the business, the project that you're working on at the time. And really getting to a point of kind of the 80-20 rule. So getting 80% of what you need whether it's to get a candidate to take the job or telling somebody 80% of the information, you don't always have to get it 100% right. And that's one of the things that has served me well over time. And from there, that really started my foundation from a recruiting perspective. And I would say that from then on, I really moved to almost every job I've had, except for this last one, through relationships with other people. So the next position I had was through somebody I had known as a candidate, and that took me to a different industry. I got into that's when I went to work for Boston Chicken in corporate recruiting. That was part of the HR department. Now, I'll be honest, when I was in some of these companies early on, I really did not like HR. I'm not a big rules person, as some of you guys in the room who know me. And I never thought I would, I was always determined not to be in the HR department. And recruiting was very black and white, so you always knew where you stand, and I think that's why I gravitated toward it. And over time, as I moved in and out of different positions, again, through different people that I knew, I went from working at Boston Chicken to, where did I go after that? I think I went from there to the cable industry through a candidate that I had placed from one of my original jobs. And then from there, I went back into the search business through the guy I'd worked for at Boston Chicken. And when I was in the search business, ended up leaving there to go work for Storage Tech. So really, it was all through people I knew. So I think the lesson for me was really building relationships and leveraging relationships for the different things in my career that I had to do. And that was the early foundation of being able to work with different people and figure out how to influence different people to get done what you need to do.
So you moved into Storage Tech, and what was your original role? I mean, you'd just come from, I think, Heidrick and Struggles. Yep. So the search industry. I think Heidrick's a fairly well-known brand in the search industry. And you came into Storage Tech. How did you enter HR at that point?
So when I came to Storage Tech, we just had a conversation about this in the back of the room. My first job was to put together an executive search, internal executive search function, and started off with that. And I think I only was there maybe two and a half years. And over the course of time, really picked up the rest of global recruiting. It had been very decentralized. And I think once we got the executive search part underway, had more bandwidth to pick up the rest of the pieces and centralize that function. And when it came down to getting acquired by Sun, just by luck, I guess, the guy who had been running global recruiting at Sun, he had just left to, I think, go to Microsoft or something like that. So that job happened to be open. And I was able to stay on and do that as well. So really, it grew from starting this in-house search function to running recruiting around the world.
So as you look at your early career, and you were successful, I mean, you made the progression fairly quickly to running, from like, ski bum to running global talent acquisition at Sun Microsystems. Why do you think, what were the factors that you look back that you say, wow, that propelled me forward? Was it influences, experience, mentors?
Yep.
What was it?
Well, it's a couple things. It's the one I just said around relationships and really having sincere relationships with people, not in just trying to do business with people, but really getting to know people and listening and figuring out, learning from them as well. I think, some of the ways that I learned how to do my job would be to go sit in other meetings with the person I worked for and just, listen to him talk about the company and the business. And that really, I think, rubbed off on me on how to present, myself in similar situations going forward. So that, that's a big one. And I think over time, I mean, I've probably only had a couple formal mentors, I guess. I mean, I haven't really stuck with anybody over the years. Although I worked for, I did work for Roger for a long time. So I guess maybe that would.
Don't say anything nice about Roger. He's in the room.
I know, I'm trying not to, but. No, I think that, for me, and the reason I made a lot of changes really had to do with company circumstances. So it wasn't, fortunately, one thing would lead to a bigger thing, but in a lot of cases, almost every company I think I worked for has since either, gone out of business, been acquired, merged, or is not whatever it was in its original state, except for maybe Heidrick and Struggles, I guess.
So you're bad luck.
I'm bad luck, yes. So that's, I think the other, one of the other things that I learned over time is, you can kind of only get so far on your, your personality and relationship piece, but you really have to know your stuff. And I think one of the things I've learned is being better organized and using data to make decisions. And I'm sure, that was hard for me to do, and I don't do it great now, but I'm much more conscious of it because I think it really drives some of the outcomes.
So a lot of people in this room may have to at some point get involved in the integration of a business, either as the acquirer or the acquiree. You've been involved in mergers at Storage Tech and Sun, Avaya and Nortel. What did you learn from those experiences that you're able to bring to this task you have now with American? Mm-hmm.
So, a couple things. I think one is that every merger is really very different. And there were even a couple more in there back in the days in the cable industry when TCI, I worked for TCI in Denver, that was bought by AT&T Broadband, which was then bought by Comcast. And I think that the important thing to know is that there's always a different nuance to each one. And you have to be flexible to the nature of those nuances. So for example, with, I'd say with Sun and Storage Tech was the smaller company, got bought by Sun, became just a division of that company. So that was really having to take that and adapt to a culture that already existed at Sun. I would say on the Avaya Nortel side, Avaya did acquire Nortel, so we had, we're fortunate to be on that side of it. But the companies were a little bit, more close, close in the type of culture that they both had. So it was trying to blend the two, trying to maintain those employee bases, and being organized and factual around the things that you want to try to integrate or not. And I think there, for example, we did some work around engagement survey work to understand what were the differences there, and then use that data for integration, and that actually worked really well. And so I think plus just the basic format of how do you do a big integration, all the different work streams that you have to keep track of, and how do you manage those. So I think that foundation is there. But what I found in this latest one with American Airlines and US Airways is that American, as everybody probably knows, was the larger airline, except for in Philadelphia. But US Airways, the US Airways management team was really taking over. And as a result of that, so American had 70,000 employees. Airways had about 30,000 employees. So while the mass, in the front lines, the employee bases, it's larger populations of American employees. At the top, it's really been taken over by the U.S. Airways management team. On a team of 12 or 13 senior leaders, there are really only 2 from American that report to the CEO. So that is, that has been driving a lot of what's going on there. And as a result, using everything in your toolkit from the past, there's some foundational things that are nice to have, but it's really been about adapting to what's the nature of how things are going right now.
Now, everyone in this audience travels a great deal, so let me ask the one question that everyone in the audience is thinking about as we move on now to talk about American Airlines. As an American Airlines executive, do you automatically get upgraded to first class when you fly? Because sometimes I get bumped and I'm
I don't think I'm allowed to answer that. I mean, if I know you're going to be sitting in first class, for sure I do not let you sit there. But
so yeah,
no comment.
No comment.
I have nice travel benefits.
All right, I'm sure you do. Is there any truth to the fact that, like, I know MGM Resorts has the M Life Insiders, what they call their employees, that you wanted to name the program the Mile High Club, or or maybe that was a bad name. You should keep working on that. All right, so
had to get that in there.
I did have to get that in there. All right. So to build a new culture, you had to take the best of both company cultures. And how did you sit down as a team and analyze that and say, all right, we're going to keep this part of American or this part of U.S. Airways and really put them together culturally?
So there were a couple things, a couple principles, I guess, that we kept in mind. From a process, systems, program standpoint, we used this term that I think was somebody else's term at another company, adopt and go. So meaning that in most cases, in 80% of cases, we would use the larger airline systems or program or process, just for in the interest of trying to move quickly and kind of integrate now, innovate later. So let's get everything in one place, and then later we can change things. From a pure employee and people culture standpoint, in all honesty, we didn't do a lot of the legwork that maybe we should have done on the front end. There's not a big appetite for doing surveys in the airline companies. I think with a large union population, both companies had not done any kind of broad employee survey in at least 10 years. And I think American especially had a lot of challenges on the labor relations side. So we're almost afraid of the results, which is a little bit crazy. But anyway, to the point of this question, that we didn't do that kind of work, but I think from being familiar with how both companies operated, just as an example, American has this reputation of having been a little bit more analytical, taking longer to make decisions, going through many cycles of analysis, and U.S. Airways was a little bit more of a maverick kind of decision-making company. So just make decisions and ask forgiveness later and just get it done and move quickly. And since I said before that the U.S. Airways management team has really been in the driver's seat, I would say that is largely what we're trying to instill in people. And I kind of, coming into it new, I don't really have a lot of allegiance to either one of those styles, and probably fall somewhere in the middle. But I would say that we've really tried to improve the operation, improve the employee morale. We talk about engagement by our people and leaders getting out there, talking to employees, being on the front line. If they're traveling, talking to the crew on the plane, saying, reinforcing the good work that they're doing, or asking how we can help. And just making, just as an example, one of the big changes that took place is in American prior, the senior leadership really never was out talking to the masses of employees, and our CEO was, didn't like to do it. There were a lot of union challenges, and I think that was some of it, but also his style and personality were not that way. Well, our current CEO came from U.S. Airways. He does a quarterly, we call it a state of the airline meeting, which is an all-employee meeting talking about the results of the company. He's very open around what his salary is and transparent about, where we are financially. We'll answer any question that comes up, and doesn't avoid questions. he also goes out and he'll have meetings along with other, some of us as well, with pilot bases, with flight attendant bases, and just open forums and real informal, casual, and is kind of a real guy of the people. And it's amazing. It's really cool to see, and it's gone a long way. And I think, I don't know for those of you who fly American or Legacy U.S. Airways, hopefully people start to see the difference. I mean, I've had people tell me that even especially on the American flights, like in and out of Dallas, that people have kind of lightened up, seem happier in their jobs. So some of that's working.
Well, all right, so you just made an assertion that people seemed happy in their jobs. I was recently on flights to San Diego, and I flew to the Grand Caymans, and I sense everyone feels sorry for me about that. But on the way back, on the outbound and the way back, I actually flew U.S. Airways or American, depending on the connection and what market I was in. I asked pretty much every employee I came in contact with what they thought of the merger, and some of them were. In Grand Cayman, they were legacy American Airlines employees, and in Philadelphia and San Diego, they were legacy U.S. Air employees. So right here, right now, do you want me to tell you what they actually said?
Well, should I predict what they would say first? And then maybe I'm wrong. I'm not the magician, so.
No, the magician's already. No, the magician's already gone. You don't have to.
Okay, so my bet is that the American employees were happy, and U.S. Airways employees, jury's still out.
Actually, and that's not true.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm wrong.
Your career as a magician is now ended. All right. No, they were actually all happy.
Okay.
And it was very interesting. They had no idea who I was. I would just say, so how's the merger going? I have, because I travel a lot, I have a pretty high status on the airlines. So, but I don't think all of them even knew that, okay? So literally, they were all pretty positive. They said the company's been really communicating with them a lot. They really felt like it was a positive step forward. They were proud of that they were in the world's largest airline. So whatever you folks are doing out of the HR group, and this is a workforce thing. I mean, this is the HR's embouchure, and certainly the leadership of the CEO, et cetera, it's being received very well. Where a lot of times in mergers, you hear organizations, it's part of the reason I wanted you to be here today, there's a lot of fear, there's a lot of concern, and a lot of sort of opacity that employees feel. The way you folks have gone about it, it's clearly working, okay? And I didn't mean to put.
I'm glad I was wrong then.
Yeah, you were actually quite wrong. So that thing about always knowing your stuff you said earlier, that just didn't work for you then at that moment.
Okay.
It was not working.
Thanks for pointing that out.
You're okay. All right. So you've been in a high-tech company, a communications technology company. You're now in an airline. Tell me, culturally, what's the differences between like an airline, or the huge geographical dispersion that you've got, and sort of the high-tech businesses you were in with Avaya or Sun Microsystems?
So I'll focus on two things. One big one was when I first walked into the offices in Dallas and American. They're in this building from the dark ages, the 70s for sure, and everything about it is very archaic and old. The technology is horrible. We had, coming out of a communications company in Avaya with, pretty cutting edge technology. They had phones that we had been throwing away 5 years ago. So that was a little, and they're very, that's one thing is from a technology standpoint, while things like mobile apps and social media, we do those kinds of things pretty well, but I would say behind the scenes, even yesterday I was here and I went on a tour of our terminal at the airport, and some of the things that we continue to do manually and the paperwork that floats around, it's just startling. So that's one big difference. But really the biggest one I think is the workforce and the employee base. And we have almost 110,000 employees, and 90% of those are frontline employees, or mostly represented employees. So there are just under 10,000 management employees, primarily in Dallas, some in the Phoenix area, which is where U.S. Airways was based. So really, whereas on the technology side, it was mostly knowledge workers and a much higher, highly educated workforce that you're working with. So adjusting to that has been, very interesting, and as a result of that, it really, some of the great strategic work that we did in my last company, that hasn't really gotten traction yet. I mean, for a couple reasons. One, I mean, we're full speed ahead on integration, but the things that get done there are very tactical. And I think there's a lot of opportunity and low-hanging fruit to get through that too. So, it's all about how do you ensure that your frontline employee has what they need to serve the customer, and that's what we're very focused on, and that's a big difference from where I came from.
So you talked earlier about, sort of transparency and facing the tough questions and the cultural differences. Let me ask you a question about diversity and a tough question at that. If we look at what is, you hear that the airline industry is a male-dominated industry as a general rule. So you might want to get your perspective as a female working there. But if you look at your stated commitment and policy on diversity on your website, then you compare it to the fact you have 9 key management members, 3 of which are women, okay? And then you have 12 board members, only 1 of which is female, 1 is an African-American male, and 1 is a Hispanic male. So when you think about your diversity, your stated diversity policies, and the actual reflection of your management and your board from a diversity perspective, there seems to be a long way to go. So what are sort of the plans around that? I mean, how are you trying to make changes from your position since you have diversity as part of your, or are you happy with where you are on diversity?
Yeah, well, let me, so when I first came in prior to the merger, American had done a lot of work over the past 10 years, really focusing on this integrated approach to diversity. Meaning we had, I'll put the HR work aside for a second, but we had a whole supplier diversity group that really focused on increasing the work we do with women and minority-owned businesses. In our marketing department, we had a whole group that focused on marketing to specific groups of people. And then on our community and government relations side, very involved in all of our different local communities. And then on the HR side, we have, in my career, it's probably one of the most robust diversity programs that I already walked into. Had 15, I think it's about 15 employee resource groups of representing everything you can think of, that was very organized, met on a regular basis, events throughout the year in both the headquarters and all the different local communities. And there's a very, I came into a team of 5 people, I think, that was doing this work. So we had a diversity committee on the board at the time. So what I walked into initially was quite robust. I think that we, had been on, many top 10 lists of surveys, and we get asked for benchmarking information quite often. Since the merger, it's adjusted a little bit, I guess I'll put it that way. And I think the management team that we now have, well, 2 things. Let me back up. So from a workforce standpoint, the 90% I said that are frontline, our representation is actually quite strong. I mean, it's very diverse across the board. We have close to 40, I think it's high 30% females in jobs, and on the people of on minorities and people of ethnic heritages, it's right up there as well. Where the challenges come in are a couple work groups. Pilots, obviously, heavily white male dominated. Field, we have a very big maintenance organization, again, another one where you don't find a lot of women and you don't find a lot of people of color in those groups. And then our biggest one is certainly in the management ranks at the top, and that's where our work is cut out for us. With the new company, we don't have that same diversity committee on the board, but we have put some things in place to account for that and do kind of an internal executive committee, if you will, and really refocus on how we build the leadership pipeline. And it's a number of different things that we have in place. We have a pretty robust MBA program that we are going to leverage this year to increase our diversity numbers. That's been okay, that we do okay in that, and have done okay in that in the past, can be stronger there. That's one. 2, we're looking at doing some mentoring programs for people, in our leadership ranks, and working with them to help with their career development. And then 3 is, obviously, at the end of the day, it's really about making some key strategic hires. And that's kind of our three-pronged approach that we're looking at right now. It's a big one. I mean, we're a big company. We want our workforce to be reflective of our customer base, and we want our leadership team to really reflect our workforce. So it's an ongoing challenge, as it has been, I'm sure, for a lot of people, and we're working on it.
All right, well, thank you for your candor. What would you say now, just very quickly, because I want to leave some time for audience questions, what do you think the greatest challenge you've faced thus far in the merger process?
So the biggest challenge is moving as quickly as we want to, as the team wants to move and needs to move to get things brought together and operating as one. I mean, as I said, there was this cultural difference around the U.S. Airways team, moving fast, not necessarily with as much analysis behind it, and too much so on the other side. And it's trying to move at that clip and that pace, but not making dumb mistakes along the way. So I think that's the daily balance that I'm dealing with.
All right. Well, thank you. And audience questions. Probably all fly the airlines. You must want to know something. We have a
bunch.
Hand up over there.
Just from a recruiting standpoint, knowing obviously that you said most of your executive population's in Dallas, and you're obviously competing against Southwest within that market, who is consistently ranked as one of the top employer brands. What are you doing from a recruitment standpoint in order to create that differentiation and get that talent, even against companies like Toyota now and PepsiCo and some of the other players in the market? So
one of the things that we're really trying to come off of is the bankruptcy hangover that American was just in. I assume everybody was aware that American just came out of bankruptcy as a result of this merger in December. So, that had obviously hurt us quite a bit in the not being on any kind of list of greatest companies to work for. So that's one. I mean, we've really, the return to our shareholders and the money that employees have made, we did several different equity payouts to employees who had held old stock, and that's really changed the morale and the momentum at the company quite a bit. So I think, one, that word of mouth is out there. A couple other things that is happening right now. So the past year is, we hired almost 2,000 flight attendants over the course of 2013, which was the largest flight attendant hiring that had gone on in 10 years for both companies. And then this year we just kicked off a big push for hiring pilots. So between those two things, that is creating this buzz around the airline is back. Our mission, I guess, if you will, is to restore American, be the greatest airline in the world. And we have we're getting that word out there. We're trying to, operate more efficiently. Just do the basics, get people places on time safely. Really working on our customer service proposition as well. And I think as we go to recruit, it's, how do you find people that represent that? We have no issue. We get tons of applicants for jobs. So, I mean, it's more than I've ever seen before. But it's really finding the people that will work in our environment.
Cindy, obviously, when you're merging a 70,000, 30,000 employee organizations, there's unique challenges because of its size. But what about scaling it down to maybe more the size that some of us are used to, a couple of hundred employees merged into a smaller organization that might be only made of 50 or 60 employees? What's the one key thing you would recommend to the senior leadership to make that integration as seamless and as ultimately successful as possible?
Sure. So, one thing that I'm not sure if we did this in this American merger the best way, but I think on the front end, you really need to define what your expectations are of the new company and how you want people to behave and act and operate. And while in some of the other experiences I've had, we did that, and that I think worked really well. Here, we've just been moving so fast and I think there was an assumption that we would just be this U.S. Airways way, and that's made it hard, because, I mean, like I said, the American workforce is much larger on the whole, especially as you get down, lower through the ranks. I mean, there are more American employees than Airways employees, and you know, that's where the rub really comes into place. So, you know, be smart on the front end. It was you know, at the time I came in, I was new, and, you know, there were a lot of internal, I guess, politics going on with different people and leaders and consulting firms that were helping us on integration, and we probably could have done that a little bit better. So define what you want and then communicate that. The other one is huge, is communication. Over-communicate. We're in the mode of figuring out how do we are trying to build this, I guess, change management communication vehicle. So if you can, you know, you can imagine all the different things that are touching either everybody or specific work groups, and when you add all those together, you can have 50 things changing in the month of September. And how do you keep track of that?
We have time for a few more questions. Anyone want to get a frequent flyer upgrade or certificate? Raise your hand. All right, so we have one over. All right, Ken, go ahead.
Hi, I was wondering if, with your future state strategy around managing talent and talent attraction workforce, do you see with the merger an opportunity to leverage technology as an early opportunity to carry some standardization and continuity across the new larger enterprise?
Definitely. So we have a lot of cobbled together systems on both companies. I would say that on the American side, several different, we're gonna be an SAP shop, if you will. So several different platforms hooked into that. U.S. Airways has different technology and not a lot of technology. So the short answer is yes. I just think it's going to take time. To my comment before around integrate now, innovate later, there are so many different technology integration efforts going on. I mean, the biggest one you guys can imagine is around our reservation systems, which is going to be not done until the end of 2015. But our, the microscope, if it's on one group, it's heavily on our IT department. So I think yes, I just think it's going to take some time before there's going to be an appetite to really, figure out where it makes sense to start.
All right, well, please join me in thanking Cindy Fiedelman,
Thanks, you
Vice
guys.
President of People and Diversity for American Airlines.
Great. Thanks, Elliot.
All right, so our next session